while maintaining sustainability. There is a need to prepare for transit-oriented development. Any micro or macro development originating from the transit node that results in wider accessibility to the transit facility. Now, this is actually quite a simple idea, but it works with multiple nuances, and we thought that it would be best to get somebody who's actually working in the field, who's practicing this currently, to talk to us a little bit about it. It is also highly sort of debatable in terms and debated today in terms of how much attention we need to put on transit and whether that's really the way going forward. And it would be great to shed some light on this through the conversation. So to do this, we've got none other than Dikshu Kukreja, who is the managing principal of CP Kukreja Architects, one of the world's largest architecture and urban design firms with offices in India and in the US as well. His work is rooted in contextuality and driven by a sustainable approach, reinforced through innovative technologies. He was awarded as the top 100 architects of year 2021 by International Union of Architects. Dikshu, could I request you to switch on your video, please? I'll continue my introduction. So given his deep interest in international relations, Dikshu currently produces and hosts a TV series as well called The Tale of Two Cities, which fosters a dialogue with policymakers from around the world. He has traveled extensively, of course, and understands and appreciates the nuances of people and nations. And in light of this introduction, we thought that, Dikshu, it would be great for you to come on board today and talk to us not only about some of the projects that you're undertaking and that you're sort of, working on, which directly relate to TODs and transit-oriented development, but also share some of your experiences that you've had globally, internationally, and to shed light on this whole idea at various scales, right? We'll obviously get into a conversation a little later, but before anything else, a very warm welcome, Dikshu. Thank you so much for taking your time and joining us this afternoon. I think you're on mute, so.
Yes, I unmute myself, and thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with you and Sneha as well as all the participants who are joining us this evening. So thank you.
We've got a great range of participants from across the world. I can see people are signing in from across India, of course, but also from different parts of the world. And we're all very excited to see your presentation. So why don't we begin with that? We will start, the floor's all yours. You can start with your presentation and then we will get into the conversation post that.
Of course. Thank you, Mrinalini. And I think given the time that we have, I would like to limit the presentation to becoming more a spur for us to engage in a conversation, and obviously followed by Q&As with the participants who are here. So rather than giving you a glimpse of the diaspora of work that we do, I would like to restrict to one particular project, which is obviously to do with smart transit-oriented development. And then we'll get into this conversation, because I think it's important for us to really discuss this subject and get to know more about this concept. So I'll start the presentation right here.
Absolutely.
And just to check with you, do you have this in slideshow mode with you?
Yes, we can see your presentation. It's absolutely clear. So you could go ahead.
And the slides changed as well.
Yes.
Right. Wonderful. So let me go back to the whole question of what is transit-oriented development. And I know this is still a concept which, of course, it is already prevalent across the world. And ironically, I think it has been a concept which has been in India many, many decades back. But of course, today in its new 21st century avatar, people want to understand what is this new concept, because for the last few decades, particularly after India's independence, I think we moved away from this kind of a planning and we moved into a very different kind of a planning across our cities. And we'll talk about that later. But first, to answer, what is transit-oriented development? And I would say in very simple terms, it's a design approach that focuses on creating mixed use within cities. So by mixed use, I mean that in one compact area, you can have a variety of uses: residential, commercial, recreational, and like in our own local parlance, they say, our old cities or old neighborhoods, the way they were planned, was really about Niche Dukan and Upar Makan. So that was in itself the most simplest form of putting a mixed use there, where on one piece of land, you actually have multiple uses. And then, of course, TOD being related to transit has to do with being mobility friendly. And this is where neighborhoods then develop around high quality public transportation. So let me start by giving you an example of Delhi. Now, ironically, Delhi is considered amongst the greenest metropolitan cities in India, if not the greenest, and amongst those in the world as well. And yet, when you start seeing Delhi, depending on which part of the year, these are the kind of images that you get, or this is what you experience about Delhi. That's the kind of smog or air quality that we have a lot of times in the year. And this is not just about COVID, but it is about how we really just try to breathe some fresh oxygen when you have that kind of pollution that I just showed you. And then Delhi's roads, much as they might be wide, and sometimes people say that the area of Delhi's roads is more than combined area of roads of Mumbai, Kolkata, and Chennai, but then this is what Delhi's roads still look like. You also have a situation where you have public transit, like the Delhi Metro, one of the first cities in India besides Kolkata, where the metro, the mass transit came in. And yet this is the kind of crowds that you see our mass transit attracts. And then another very unfortunate problem that our cities face, and again, Delhi, these are the statistics for Delhi, that's the kind of feeling of safety, or rather unsafety, that women have in a city like Delhi, in a capital of the country, which is very disturbing, I think. So how do we design solutions for a safer as well as for a healthier city? And I think transit-oriented development is one sort of an approach to what India can take as a response to fixing the issues I just shared and fixing the issue of urban mobility. And what are the components of TOD? So TOD basically has, these components that you see around where it talks about complete or connected streets. It talks about last mile connectivity and inclusive habitat, optimized densities, and as I said earlier, mixed use, mixed land use, a non-motorized transport network, managed parking systems, integrating the informal sector. These are all aspects of TOD. And what are the support and tools that we can really include in TOD planning is, you capture the land value optimally, you increase the safety and security of the neighborhood. You can go with models like PPP, which is public-private partnership coming together, and various other models. So transit-oriented development in that sense, or smart living, I would say, encourages reduced dependency on your personal vehicle, particularly personal motorized vehicles such as the car. It encourages sustainable urban development, which goes along with economic development. It also provides you access to affordable housing because it's allowing you to increase densities of development, and thereby leading to an improved public health, and allows you also the opportunity to provide community facilities because you are working in a model of a mixed use development. So it's not where we have in 60s, 70s, and 80s lived in cities which have created master plans where you go literally with a color box, as I say. You paint a part of the city red, which becomes commercial area. You paint another part of the city which becomes yellow, which is residential. All that's washed away, and you allow the mix of uses, which also then allows community buildings. And as cities continue to grow, and transportation will become obviously increasingly important, TOD, I think, is a solution for a sustainable urban development. So let me start with share this project with you, which we designed, which is considered amongst the first, or perhaps the first, transit-oriented development in India, which is called East Delhi Hub in Karkarduma, where we joined hands with an international team. We had IDOM consultants also from Spain working along with us. And what was our inspiration? Because this was a completely new model of living for Indian cities. And we realized the sense of responsibility that this has, because you have a lot riding on your shoulders. If it's successful, it can become the benchmark and can be a model which is easily replicated. If it's not, I think it just goes, completely into oblivion. So for us, what inspired us most was architecture and as nature. And I always say this, the coexistence of the built environment with the natural environment, and how you adapt the ecosystem, how you appreciate the natural beauty, and just the way you see these lily pads emerging out of what could be a not so attractive water body, and these beautiful lilies or lotus that come out there, become icons of beauty. That was an inspiration for us, that in a city which might be very disorganized, very haphazard, how do you create an organized TOD development? So there were examples we looked at both in India and abroad. And of course, this model in the 19th century has been very prevalent in European cities. And since this is a new type of density we are talking about, a high density, so the importance is that it must have a flexibility, sustainability, and also the aspects of smart technology. So how do you generate this organic density, or as I said, a mixed use urban district, and create a flexible model rather than a rigid model of planning? Planning should always allow for that flexibility and in terms of evolving as time goes by. And most importantly, the idea of creating sustainable design and a smart district. So for us, there were these three S's which became our goals. It was about smart mobility, it was about smart security, and it is about smart communication. And then there are three D's as well. It's about dealing with a very high density. It's about being inclusive and creating and embracing the kind of diversity, whether it comes in terms of income groups or the land use itself or the building typologies. You could have luxury housing, you could have affordable housing. How do you embrace that diversity in this development? And the idea of distance. So it becomes, in a sense, the node, the nucleus becomes the transit station. And from there, the areas of influence change. So it's not the linear development or the model of American cities the way they developed in 20th century, but it's a completely different way of looking at it. So this is East Delhi Hub, which is a site which we were given where there were already two elevated metro lines and the viaduct, which were already existing on the site. It was a very awkward shaped site of about 85 acres. And these two points that you see here were actually two different metro lines with two different, obviously, metro stations, and then this becoming an interchange station. So we thought that this should become the center or the nucleus from where the development emerges. And let's look at, rather than the typical American gridiron pattern of cities that they have done from East Coast to West Coast, let's look at a radial system of development, because our point of radial development starts, as I said, it originates with the metro station. And how do we create in this development active frontages so that you don't have neighborhoods which become unsafe at night or in evening times? How do you create and reinforce the experience for the pedestrian? And the pedestrian is not kind of pushed away to the sides with no sidewalks, etc., which most of our cities tend to boast of. How do we deal with water management in the city? And how do we, most importantly, create an organic density? So this is how this development of the master plan has shaped up, where we have created these kind of clusters, and each cluster has, rather than making a development which becomes faceless, a mega development, it is a mega development. It is a large density, but it's broken down into clusters, the way we've had in our very successful, I would think, form of urban planning in our Indian cities traditionally, the mohalla and the chowk. So these are the different components of this development. And this is what the volumetric disposition becomes. So where you see the metro stations, the interchange station, we designed what would be Delhi's tallest building. The highest density that you can see is absorbed here. So you actually get off the metro station and just walk across on a sky bridge into this building, thereby relieving the congestion from the streets. And then you have these other sort of lily pads, as I call them, these vertical towers in each of the clusters. In terms of how the land uses, when we talk about mixed land use, so this is the street level, and on the street level, on the bottom right in the legend, you can see how there is different building land uses. which are on the same piece of land and how it changes color. I go back to the street level and you notice that these clusters have a commercial activity, which you see in the purple color, and you go to an upper level and it changes into residential. So like I said, shopping below or commercial below and residential above. And then these are the towers. So the podiums get left behind, and then these small footprints that you see emerge as the tall high rises as towers. Here's another look of this kind of a development, which is again, as I said, embracing the organic nature of the city. It is not something, it seems like it's emerged from the pattern of development around rather than looking like something which is completely in isolation from the city. And it allows you then to play with the idea of creating axes and what happens. So that's an existing road. And when you're walking down that road, what do you see at the end of the road? A tower which becomes like a beacon there. And likewise, things start happening in other points also. As you're walking down here, you see this tower. So that's how the disposition and volumetric play of the tower starts coming. And then you have lots of greenery. So not just a typical ground level green space or public space, but also you create these podium terraces, which become another kind of a green open space. So this becomes a little more private in nature in that sense, restricted to those towers or the people living in that area. So while the level below could have commercial, recreational, etc., these become more private spaces because from here on the tower takes a residential land use, below was the commercial, so this becomes the segregating separation. That's how the sort of an urban design notion of the city. And the important thing here was that when you're creating this kind of a development, are you just looking at it as a real estate on a piece of land, or are you looking at it as a gesture which you are making at a larger urban level for the city? So what we decided to do here was, we did a broader study, and to our, should I say, shock and dismay, we realized that while Delhi is supposed to be the greenest city, as I mentioned, but when you come to this part of Delhi, the East Delhi, there are hardly any parks. There are hardly any public green spaces. South Delhi has Lodi Gardens and Nehru Parks and all of those. But what does East Delhi have? So we were very firm that while we are creating this high density development, we want to give a relief to the entire neighborhood, to this entire precinct of Delhi. And for that, we created a large 10-acre park within the heart of this development, which then becomes the unique feature of this project. So it is not just about density and real estate, but it is about what you can give back to the city. I'm also going to just share here with you the aspect which you talked about when I've traveled around the world. So transit-oriented developments is, of course, one form of looking at how cities can develop. But for me, it's very important that we blur the political divides that we have between nations, between parts of the world. And what you then realize is that it's really, for me, was a very pleasant surprise to see that whether you travel to parts of other parts of the world, it could be South America, it could be Africa, it could be other cities in Asia, and you realize that how many similarities our cities have in terms of challenges and opportunities. So I hosted this television series called Tale of Two Cities last year. And what this did was it allowed me to travel and meet with presidents and prime ministers and other global mayors. And I was exploring the relationship between one international city and one Indian city. So let me just share a snippet from one of the episodes where I met with the president of Colombia, who himself is a proponent, strong proponent of sustainability. He talks about biodiverse cities, not biodiversity, but biodiverse cities. And we spoke about Bogota, the capital of Colombia, and Ahmedabad. And, Bogota is one city which has gone through such a transformative urban development through the interventions that have taken place there, which was really amazing, from a city which was completely crime-ridden to a city which is now really thriving. And one of the concepts that they took was, which has been very successful, is the BRT, or the bus rapid transit system. They call it the Transmilenio because it was introduced at the turn of the century in 2000. And this has been so successful in Bogota. And as you can see, it is a concept of development which revolves again around transit. There was another episode of mine which compared the cities of Melbourne and Kolkata. And what was interesting here was to see that, both these cities, amongst many, many other interesting aspects that come out when you scratch the surface, one of the aspects was about how these two cities, Kolkata and Melbourne, even till date, continue to embrace the tram system as a means of public transport. Another concept and how cities learn from each other. I think a lot of us have heard about the High Line, which is in New York, where they transformed the elevated railway lines and transformed it into a beautiful urban green space, which runs through the city literally like arteries, green arteries across Manhattan. But High Line has become a source of inspiration for what I discovered when I was talking with the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Sarah Cap. I discovered that for them, High Line became an inspiration to do a similar development along Yarra River in Melbourne and other parts of Melbourne City. So how we can take inspiration and learnings, positive ones I must add, from one city to another. These are just images of High Line. I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with this. And I want to just end by saying that, we hear this phrase a lot these days about Vasudev Kutumbakam. And I actually think that it is a very strong phrase because it has such a deep meaning attached to it when you look at it even from the eyes of an urban planner, that, it's about one world, one future, one family, or one world, one family, one future. Whichever way you look at it, it is about really how we can learn from each other, how cities which face similar challenges across the globe, and some have found reasonably successful solutions, can be a source of inspiration to others as we all deal with the challenges that our cities are facing, and how do we make them actually more livable. So those are my thoughts, but I would love to now have a conversation with you, and then open to, of course, questions and comments from the participants. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dikshu. That's been quite interesting to see. And I'm sure that we're already getting a lot of questions and comments from the audience. But what, the first thing that kind of comes to my mind is that when we have greenfield sites, right, and there's so much that we can do, and you have a clean canvas, you have an open sort of canvas in front of you, you can start to design from scratch. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what's in a way happening with the East Delhi Hub, right? Like you have certain stimuli that you're responding to, you have certain parameters, you've got the metro lines and the metro stations, and you're developing a TOD around that. One question that comes to mind is that, we don't get such opportunities very often in a country like India, where there is so much development already that exists. How do we start integrating the idea of transit-oriented development within the existing urban fabric? Instead of, it's one thing to kind of start from scratch and to build from ground up, but I would like to know your perspective on the kind of development and the densities that we are working with that exist in cities like Delhi and Mumbai and Bangalore and Chennai and Kolkata and Hyderabad. How do we actually start to integrate these ideas into existing urban fabrics?
That's a very good question, Mrinalini, because yes, cities are more challenging than imagining them as carte blanche and just doing only greenfield development. And I think that's what sustainable development is also a lot about. That how do you reuse, redevelop the buildings that you already have in the city? How can you give them a new meaning? And just destroying them or demolishing them is not the answer, but being able to reuse them in a more meaningful manner, adapting them to a new use, renovating them, restoring some of them. All these are and the technology is there at our disposal. And all these are tools and methods that we need to start inculcating, rather than thinking the easiest thing to do in a development is you have a virgin land, you have trees there, cut them all. You have a virgin land, or you don't have a virgin land, it's a brownfield project, first and foremost, demolish what's there, raise it to the ground, and then build again. I think we need to now start thinking afresh on that. The other aspect, which I think is that I think we all need to acknowledge, and enough cities in India, across India, are clear reminders of that, that we cannot let our cities become urban sprawls, that you just keep horizontally expanding the city endlessly for tens of kilometers. And may I say that some of them actually a couple of 100 kilometers, that the city is turning into large metropolises. I don't think that's really the answer to our urban living. So therefore, it's important that we come back to the notion of first realizing that land is a precious resource. And with that, starting to relook at what for centuries we did very well is compact development and high density development. Now, high density development a few centuries back was low rise high density development. Today, with technology and the escalating costs of land and the other features and facilities and our ways of life, all allow us to maybe go more vertical. Either which way, we have to take land as a precious resource, and that's the way I think development must happen.
That's really interesting. And it's, we talked about certain cities, and I really liked what you said when you said Niche Dukaan, Upar Makan. I think that's something that you see across cities, right? That's not only in India. I mean, we say it in Hindi, but so it becomes Indian. But if you look at it worldwide, you look at the High Line, for example. I remember when I was in architecture, I was doing my undergrad, my first year project was to design on this 9 meter by 9 meter property along the High Line, where it was literally, that was a program, right? You design a commercial sort of development on the ground floor, or even the first couple of floors. And because the High Line allows you to get another ground level above at an elevated level, and then you design residential. And so this idea of kind of bringing that back is quite interesting. And we see more and more of that happening. How would you recommend we start to adapt that in existing cities like Delhi and Mumbai? Again, to kind of avoid that, lateral sprawl.
So I think the way to adapt it is, like I said, we have the technology today. So even if it's a brownfield development, that means there is a building already sitting out there. Rather than, okay, let me take an example. For example, you could have, you have a lot of mill land in Mumbai. You have mills there, and they are obviously defunct. So one way is you completely remove them, raise them to the ground, and you build something afresh. The other way to do it is that can we be more inventive, that we reuse what is already built. And yet, because we have the technology, you could have towers which are still going above those building structures which are already existing. So you're reusing what is already there, and yet you're not just romanticizing it and in that sense maybe underutilizing the land. So you are also building above it. That's one example. Similarly, a similar model could happen in a city like Delhi, or for that matter, Kolkata, and many other parts of the country where you have these very charming historic neighborhoods, beautiful buildings there. But you know what? Either they are being torn down, or they are beginning to look so awkward in surrounded by a very new design vocabulary and very new developments. These beautiful houses or villas, or you have many of these Parsi homes sitting in Mumbai. You have these beautiful homes sitting in Goa, and many other cities I see in Chennai. Rather than just allowing these to become, awkward pieces in the urban fabric of the city, I think we can reuse that part of what is built, and yet we are able to build something alongside it, above it, or attached to it. So many ways of doing it, I think.
I think what's also interesting, I mean, you talk about, building towers and increasing density, but what's also interesting, and this is happening a lot, especially in Delhi and, in a lot of parts of Delhi, especially South Delhi, we see this happening everywhere. Two things. One is that a lot of residential areas that are especially along arteries or main roads have started to now lease out or give their lower floors to commercial upholding. So that is it's become like this organic sort of way of, of developing property now. People have started to realize the value of it. And I think the other thing is also this idea of the stilt, right? Which is, again, you're kind of going into the air, so you're elevating residential and you're utilizing your ground space for other activities. Now, whether it's parking or whether it's commercial or offices or however it may be, but it's interesting to see this happen across scales. So it's not only about taking greenfield sites and open canvases and building a TOD, but it's also about how you start to adapt existing features and existing fabrics with these ideas, right? Which actually also brings me to the concept of India, given its climate, given its, our sort of built environment and the pollution levels that we are kind of facing with, people are not very comfortable walking around. People are not talking about taking public transport, and especially people who have the disposable income who have personal cars and private cars, they don't want to be inconvenienced by taking the metro, right? Because that means that they would have to walk from point A to point B, which you address in your presentation, that in TODs that would start to address these issues. And we've got a couple of comments from our audience as well, which talks about this idea of how many of us actually take the metro, or how many of us actually use public transport in order to go from point A to point B, or to travel around the city. So I'm going to take this opportunity to bring in a poll, in fact, and ask the people that have joined us today that how often do they use public transportation? So Rudra, can we actually pull that up? And so the question today is, how often do any of us use public transportation? And the idea of wanting to know this is just to identify that how popular is it? Because of course, we see hordes and hordes of people using the Delhi metro, and hopefully, the Mumbai metro that's to come up. Of course, we know the kind of populations and the number of people who use the locals in Mumbai. But there's a lot of debate that's also coming around about these new transportation hubs and mediums that are developing across the country, and how useful they would be for anyone, if at all. Do we have a result already? Dikshu, what do you feel?
So there you go. You have the result there.
Yeah.
But you know what I feel? Maybe you want to comment on that first before I give my comments.
Well, the result, I'm actually surprised. I was hoping for a more, well, I didn't realize that it would be so equally divided. That you've got people who use it daily, 12%, once or twice a week, 27%, a couple of times a month is 20%, and a few times a year, 32%. I was actually really hoping to see people use public transportation more, especially, I'm assuming, well, a lot of our audience right now comes from big cities and metropolitan sort of urban centers, and to see that they're not using public transportation as much as they could is a little discouraging, isn't it?
So it's discouraging, but there's a reason for it, and let me share that with you. And this is where I think, when you said, how about using public transit from point A to point B? That's precisely where the problem lies in our cities right now. There is not, what's missing is the last mile connectivity. So while you can take the metro from your home to get to your workplace, but if your workplace, the metro stops, let's say a mile before your workplace, how do you then walk it? And that is where, like you said, in inclement weather or the kind of climate that we are in, it's not that easy for everybody to just walk 1 or 2 kilometers. So that's where we have a problem that, we've got people to move in mass transit from one point to another, but that's not their final destination or even the origin. The origin is maybe a mile away on either side. So unless we make it an integrated urban mobility system, its success is not going to be what we would like its success to be. So I think that's one important aspect that city administrations need to look at. You can boldly announce that you have laid this metro line or started this metro line, but are you also simultaneously planning for that last mile connectivity? And that has been a problem in Indian cities, I feel.
Absolutely. And also this whole idea of, we're talking about, we actually have a comment from someone who says that, oh, we've got so many highways and roadways that have been developed and that have been made in our cities, and yet there's congestion. And I think Mumbai is a classic example of that, right? Mumbai has expanded over the years and has expanded exponentially, just in terms of the landmass, in terms of the people, the number of people who come into the city every day, the density. You were talking about going vertical and creating denser developments. There have been talks for decades now about developers taking over Dharavi and building, taller structures. But then we're also talking about densities that exceed, places like Shanghai and Hong Kong. And does the city actually have the capacity and the capability to cater to those kind of densities? And I'll come to the sort of the roadway system.
So, that's another question which is obviously a matter of a lot of debate and investigation, that what is that optimum capacity of a city? Can it just keep growing, sprawling horizontally forever? Or can it just keep going taller and taller? Is that the solution? Or there has to be some optimum size of a city beyond which, you just go ahead and have to have another area of concentration. So that is something which I think is very important to also look into, because I, for one, do believe that cities have to have a certain optimized capacity, or a certain point beyond which there is then no solution that can fix it, at least in a sustainable manner. And that is something I think our cities and our administrators, everybody needs to come together to start thinking about. I just heard in the news a couple of days back that, like in Delhi, we are part of what we call the NCR, the National Capital Region. So I believe in one of the manifestos of one of the political parties is to make Bangalore into a SCR, or a state capital region. Now that's one model of urban planning. And another model of urban planning is that, we control what Bangalore is, and we start looking at creating a more balanced development in rest of the state. Or is it that we just keep expanding Bangalore into a, sort of a metropolis, which it in a way already is. So I feel that transit-oriented development, in a way, is at the moment, as I see it, a fix-it, a band-aid to what cities have already done or are grappling with as issues. But it is not a solution which can sort of, catapult our cities into building even more. And for that, I think what you raised in the beginning was a very good point, that can we look at what cities already have as built fabric, and can that only be reused in a manner? Or is it really that we have to have only, greenfield land, and then you come up with these grandiose ideas? So this kind of balanced development is very, very important. But whichever way you look at this whole animal called a city, what we need to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, it's about life of people that is dependent on it. So I find it appalling that a city like Delhi, the kind of problems we face, and this is an example, Delhi is an example actually of most Indian cities which face the same problem. We have the monsoons, and every year after year, I'm on one TV panel discussion or another talking about why monsoon rains have created a havoc in Delhi, why monsoons have created a havoc in Mumbai, what has happened to the lakes of Bangalore and Chennai. So same problems year after year. Where are the solutions? Same time in the year, we start talking about the air quality dipping to absolutely unlivable, unhealthy times in Delhi and other parts of the country. Then you start talking about cities going completely dry, the groundwater completely going down. So these are all issues which we now need to realize, enough's been spoken about. And I think now people like you, me, and the participants obviously here who are concerned, the people interested in urban development, we all need to really think that, now the time is there to fix these solutions. We've been talking about it. We've been crying over it for years and decades, but nothing seems to be happening. Maybe TOD is that one spark, but I'm not here a proponent to say that's the end-all solution. It has to be a far more holistic approach. And I'm happy to share this with you, and I hope it is worthwhile what I end up doing. But at the moment, as part of the G20, which India has the presidency of, I'm part of a group within what is called Think 20. And there I'm involved with something called Livable Cities of the Future. And this is being able to talk to thinkers from around the world and spearhead, hopefully, certain new solutions towards what our livable cities of the future should be or can be like. But this is one initiative. I feel a lot of us have to take a lot of initiatives to find the right solution.
I'm actually, that's really interesting. I would be curious whether, we could use certain satellite cities. Like you've got, for example, within the NCR, you've got Noida, right? You've got Ghaziabad. Ghaziabad is, of course, very dense. But Noida has its own dense pockets. But Noida's kind of, fallen by the wayside in a certain sense. Gurgaon took over everyone's attention and has developed into an independent city of itself. But what about actually introducing TODs in cities like this, in satellite or peripheral cities, so that you can actually then start connecting them with the main city or actually develop them as these self-sustaining centers of their own?
No, absolutely. Right now, what is happening, and again, you and I keep referring to Delhi, but for our participants here, we are using Delhi just as an example. It's actually the problem lies in every city, similar shades of gray which are there all over. So right now, the solution or the way it has been looked at, Mrinalini, is that okay, here is Delhi. Delhi, that's where people want to come to. There's urban migration here all the time. People can't afford to live here or maybe sometimes even work here, usually live. So therefore they go and keep expanding and start living either in Noida or Gurgaon or Ghaziabad or Meerut and then commute every single day to work in Delhi. I don't think that's the solution. I think, yes, we can have mass transit, we can have rapid rail and all those kind of things that are being developed as transportation infrastructure. But I think what we need to start looking at is that can we make these areas, these sub-cities, or they themselves are actually large enough to be called cities, can we make them independent? Can they be self-sustainable? For example, with this concept of mixed use, why can't we just live in Noida and work in Noida, have our proper healthcare in Noida, and have our proper recreation and other facilities, which make us, live 95% of our life or time in Noida, rather than having to commute a couple of hours every single day from a Faridabad to Delhi or from a Meerut to Delhi. Why do we have to do
Gurgaon
that?
has done that, right? Gurgaon has managed to do
Gurgaon
that.
has done it, but
Certain
that's
level.
another subject for another session we can have,
Sure.
Mrinalini, on what all Gurgaon has not done or done it wrong.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
Noida has done to some scale as well. But I'm not here to be cynical. That's absolutely not the intent, and I don't ever believe in being cynical. But I think we have lessons to learn, and we need to understand that whatever we have done, perhaps for whatever reasons, we have not done it right, which is fine. But now there needs to be that seriousness that we need to do. Otherwise, that survey that I showed you, 96% of women feeling unsafe in Delhi. I mean,
Absolutely.
what is that meant to be? And I don't know if that figure is from actually a couple of years ago. Has that even climbed to 98 or 99%, just like the way board marks tend to climb? But is this the way we want our cities to be? So we need to actually look at solutions far deeper, far stronger, far more debatable. And for that, I saw some message come on your chat, but it just went off before I could actually read it fully. But it talked about a bottoms-up approach in American cities. So yeah, that's one Western model I wouldn't mind looking at, that how do you make it a citizen-centric city? How do you make sure that the resident welfare associations or the communities become participants in the development of that area? Many times our citizens are running from door to door or filing RTIs, and they don't even know what's coming up next door to their house, because these things tend to be very many times opaque. So we need to make it more citizen-centric. That's what will bring that sense of pride and ownership to us in our city.
I would actually like to take this opportunity to bring in another poll, because we had prepared this in advance. Rutra, if you can pull up audience poll 2, where we actually want to ask our participants, right? What deters you from using public transportation? This is, of course, assuming that a lot of people are being deterred. But for those who are happy to use public transportation, you have the option there as well. But the options that came to our mind was that there's a lack of connectivity, like we discussed, right, between home and where I need to go. It could be you have connectivity from point A to B, but again, we're talking about last mile as well over here. The amenities provided at stations and hubs that are inadequate, and this could be anything from washrooms to water to snacks to anything that you might need during your transit. You don't feel safe or comfortable traveling by bus or metro or by train. And this is not only limited to women, but this could be to anyone, people of different ages, right? People I know who are elderly. The elderly, they don't feel safe traveling by themselves. Is there a serious concern of cleanliness and hygiene? And of course, this is something that kind of is recurring in various parts of the country. All of the above, none of the above, or are you happy to travel by public transport? I think a lot of this also depends on how frequently people travel, because if you're doing it, infrequently, you don't mind once in a while if you have to face certain trouble, because that's not something that you're going to be doing on a daily basis. But of course, if you're going to be using the metro or a bus or a train or any sort of public transport on a daily basis, these things start to accumulate and they start to become more and bigger issues. So if we have the results, let's have a look at what people have to say. There you go. There's a lack of connectivity. And I'm actually very happy to see, and I'd be curious to see the people who feel that your amenities are adequate and you feel safe and all, whether these are people from larger metro cities or what. But it's interesting to see that it's the connectivity which is the biggest problem over here. And that's quite telling, I would say.
So I think I have an idea here. This looks very encouraging, and I think the model that you've created for this discussion is also very interesting. I would say that one should take it beyond what we are doing today. This could be a great starting point, and you can engage with this very informed participants that we have today, and maybe this can be spread out to other concerned citizens as well. And I think whatever could be the results of those surveys, we need to share with people, the city administrators, because look, you can see what is the choice people want to make and what is the choice people are not able to make and the reasons for it. And if the reasons are out there in black and white, why can't they be addressed? So yeah. I think it's very, very important that we give a very serious look at what our cities are doing to us. And I don't think in the 21st century we deserve to live like this, that with the kind of air we breathe is absolutely, killing us. What it's doing to our body, who knows? And the fact that, what the kind of water that we are drinking, the kind of unsafe neighborhoods that are there, in not only in terms of crime, but even in terms of buildings where, you have so much which is not built as per codes, and come an earthquake or a fire and you see the kind of calamities that happen in city after city. So I don't think this is what we deserve in the 21st century. And I really feel it's something we need to. So when you talk about smart development, I think transit-oriented development is just one sort of tool for it. But smart development is about really smartening ourselves, using our common sense, using our community forces to come together to make this kind of a difference to our cities.
Absolutely. Maybe we can pick up some of our audience questions over here. We're getting some really interesting questions. There's one which actually brings up the idea of developing TODs around railway stations and regional transportation, which is more interstate as opposed to only local. Any comments on that? That's interesting to see that, because we are looking at something that's very sort of specific, but can we actually broaden the horizons over here a little bit?
No, of course. I think that also, when you, the simple answer, short answer to that is yes. And the kind of mixed-use development that you do in a transit-oriented development depends on the scale. So if it's a metro station, which is only an intra-city means of transport, then obviously you have a certain kind of development. When you have an intercity transit system, such as a railway station, which is connecting people between two cities, then you do that kind of a transit-oriented development. By that, I mean, you will probably have that you land into, let's say, the New Delhi station or the Chhatrapati Shivaji terminus or wherever else you, Hooghly station, and you will need to have at that station itself facilities like, let's say, hotels, let's say, central business district or high-level commercial, etc., which happens there itself, so that you don't have to navigate the entire city. You've arrived there, and if you notice, some of our cities are now beginning to develop aero cities. I mean, we designed the one in Delhi near the T3 airport, and that's exactly what an aero city is also about. That, you know, when you land in a city, the first thing that a person who arrives at an airport needs is a hotel accommodation. So why don't you just give that right there next to the airport, rather than for him to drive down miles into the city? He might be coming there for a few hours into that city or overnight, but he has to go miles into the city searching for an hotel. You have a mixed use development happening right there. And AeroCity in Delhi is I would call it, very humbly though, rather successful development that we were able to create.
No, absolutely. And it's also interesting that and over years, it's kind of developed and evolved into something, you know, it kind of grows every year and every day, because it's not only about catering to the airport anymore. It actually holds commercial holdings. There are people who actually go to AeroCity to work and come back, right? So it's become like it's self-sustained. Like you said, it's become that development that is mixed use, and it not only caters to one type of people anymore, but caters to a whole lot of other people as well.
Right.
Talking about people, it's, you know, we've got somebody who asks us about what about the underprivileged. There's a major problem in the lack of adequate facility for the underprivileged, which is essential to improve in our cities. This is by Sanjeev Sood. How would you like to address that?
Of course, I think
that is definitely an important part of our community.
Of course. Like you said, you spoke about Dharbi a few minutes back, and in yesterday's newspaper, I was reading about how you know, the very sad stories about the slum dwellers on the periphery of South Delhi, near the Tughlakabad area, who have been evicted. And, you know, they are questioning that, look, we have our Aadhaar cards, or we vote in elections, etc., etc. Then how come you come one day and just destroy our home and destroy our life? So these are very poignant situations. These are very challenging issues for cities to see that how can we make our cities more equitable? We cannot have the American phenomena of NIMBY, the acronym for not in my backyard. Of course, we need support staff, but they can't live near my home.
Absolutely.
So we need to change that mindset. We need to understand that cities have to be more inclusive, have to be more equitable, and that's the only way you can do it. We do not have the luxury, and we should not, in fact, have it also, that we believe we live in an elitist neighborhood, and people that we need in our society to help us or work with us should be there, but not near us. They just appear, do their work, and disappear. How can you have a city like that?
It's really interesting. I mean, we're talking about people, and when we say underprivileged, I mean, you know, it's a much larger umbrella term, which could mean and could include anybody and everybody. But what's also interesting is, like, for example, the new Mumbai Coastal Road that's coming up in Mumbai. Apparently, it caters to only 2% of the population that drives private vehicles, right? And so even the C-Link, which was initially, when it was developed, it was supposed to have, or they had anticipated more than 1.2 lakh cars per day on the C-Link, whereas the maximum that it has reached is about, or an average it has reached, is about 37,000 cars per day. So these kind of infrastructural projects that are catering to a very, very small population of the city versus the local trains, which cater to millions and millions of people who use the train to transit from, you know, different corners of the city. And these are the people who are the lifeline. They're the ones who are making the city work. They're the ones who are actually, they're the ones who are kind of, they're the cogs in the wheel, the real cogs in the wheel. And so hoping that the metro can somehow sort of, you know, add to that, add another layer, and provide that sort of respite to the Mumbai locals in some way, like it has done in Delhi. I think the Delhi metro system has been quite exemplary in doing that, and it caters to everybody, right? Yes, we have certain issues with last mile connectivity. There are a lot of comments that are coming in saying that just for me to get to the metro station is a problem. If it's too cold, or it's too hot, or if it's raining, or if it's dusty, or whatever it may be. But it has been a step in the right direction, I would say.
No, I think it's very important. Like I said, I think citizen advocacy is the solution here. And that is the only way I can see. And fortunately, we are in a democracy. So we have a voice if we are ready to speak out. So when you give the example of the coastal road in Mumbai, sometimes I think we get carried away with examples that we see in the Western world. We get carried away that people who are decision makers or decision influencers can tend to be people who are, may I say, more elitist and therefore not representing the cross section of society. And I also feel that in a city where you have such pressures of land and urban mobility, etc., you need to first see that the solution you are coming out for the city, how many people is it serving? And that is very important. So I would say when you compare that coastal road or the sea link with the local trains that run in Mumbai, I think it's obvious out there the answer that you need to address the issue of enhancing the infrastructure of the local trains and not look at these elitist solutions which actually tend to be also very environment unfriendly. So that is very, very important to look at in all aspects. I also feel when I talk about citizen advocacy, I really believe a lot in that. And through the medium of this discussion today, I want to reach out to people and say that, there are two ways to look at it. One is that we feel, oh my God, this is just sounding all, blah, blah, blah. And what can I really do? Nothing is in my hands. Now, that's one approach. I don't agree with that approach. For example, I want to share with you, Mrinalini, we have a foundation called CP Kukreja Foundation for Design Excellence. Now, we joined hands with NASA and we created a trophy in the name of Mr. CP Kukreja. And this year we had a competition, design competition, where we invited students from across the country to give their entries or solutions for public spaces. How do you improve the public space in whichever city or whichever public space that you are accustomed to or you have seen or you are moved by? And for the first time ever in the history of NASA, there were staggering over 500 entries that have come. And now we want to take this further to city administrators from where these entries have come and tell them, look, here is the young talent, engage with them, and why don't you enhance these public spaces? So there are so many things we can actually do if we join hands or if we think of ideas. The last thing we should do is sort of armchair criticism. Now, I'm not going to start sounding like a political speech here, but Mrinalini, I have to rush to catch a flight.
Sure.
So would like you to please consider
Yes.
wrapping up the session.
No, I think that's very encouraging just for the people who are not architects and who haven't gone through the educational system in architecture. NASA is the National Association of Students of Architecture. And I think, Dikshu, it's really encouraging to see that you are, not just looking at doing your own projects, but also involving the community and the younger people, because that's where, hopes lie. And that's where we can see the future of what there is to come. I know there are a lot of people who have been sending in questions and comments. What we will try to do is we'll try to put some stuff together and reach out to us if you have any other pressing points. We'll try to kind of pin Dikshu down for more answers later on a later occasion, or maybe just have it back for another.
I'll be happy to respond back, or if you'd like, we can always take this into session 2. And continue this kind of a discussion.
Yes, but thank you so much, Dikshu. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here and talking about something that's very, very pertinent. Talking about something that is very important on the ground and on paper and at the level of policymakers, but also in the hands of each one of us. And I think that's a very important point to walk away with, that advocacy is not only is not sort of left to people who we think have the power, because the power lies in our hands. And together we can make a difference. And we do hope that the audience is encouraged by that. I would also like to thank the audience that's tuned in from everywhere across the globe and on different platforms. Thank you all so much for being here with us. There's a short feedback form for our audience. My team's going to share it in the chat box. So please let us know what you felt about this particular session and also what you'd like to hear more of. And if you'd like to have Dikshu back with us for another session, which I'm sure would be great. But Dikshu, we will not keep you from your flight. Thank you so much once again and for doing this with us.
Thank you. Thank you. It was such a lovely topic to be discussing. And I've had this very engaging conversation with Sneha a couple of months back at the Kala Ghoda Festival. And of
Yes.
course, with you, we've been talking about so many pertinent urban issues time and again that
Yes.
I was very keen to have this kind of a dialogue. And yes, I think what you people are doing, and appreciate Godred's effort as well, because I think these kind of conversations, you don't know where they can reach. You don't know what they can transform tomorrow. So let's keep our chins up. Let's be optimistic. Let's make our cities more livable, and let's keep chatting. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dikshu. And thank you everyone for joining in today.
Very
Have a
insightful
great
masterclass,
day.
Dikshu. Thank you.
Thank you.